Hello everybody and welcome back to Screen Stars. The Strain is an FX TV show that started in 2014 and I watched the first two seasons fairly religiously, and this was before I had my channel, and really quite enjoyed them. However, when season 3 started, I remember watching the first episode and then just, as happens quite a lot with some TV shows for me, I kind of lost track of it. But I have managed to catch up now with season three, and I finished watching that. And I am now ready to start watching season 4. But I thought I would do like a review of the first 3 series of this show, to prepare for the 4th season. Now, this is, like I said, this is a show that I started watching when it first came out. I don't know much about the books and the comics. I know it was created by Guillermo del Toro and Chuck Hogan, and they co-created the show and wrote the show, etc., and produced it. But I don't really have any knowledge of the comics and the books. I just know that the show is based on that. So the show stars Corey Stoll as Ephraim Goodweather. We've got David Bradley as Satrakian, Kevin Durand as Fett, Jonathan Hyde as Eldridge Palmer, Richard Samel as Thomas Einhorst, Miguel Gomez as Gus, Natalie Brown as Kelly Goodweather, Ruth Gedmitus as Dutch, Rupert Penry Jones as Quinlan, and Robin Atkin Dowes that does the voice for the Master throughout the show. Now, season 1, how does this show start? Well, initially it starts at the beginning of season 1. Now, I haven't rewatched season 1s and 2, so I'm not going to give you in-depth reviews on them, because it's just mainly, most of it is from memory. But season 1, you start, there is an aeroplane at the beginning. It is stationary at JFK Airport. It's all a bit weird. The CDC are called in, and Ephraim Goodweather and his team, who were part of the CDC, are called in to check the plane because they're worried it might have diseases and all this kind of stuff. And what basically actually happened is that it was actually carrying the Master, the Vampire Master, in this plane from Berlin, I believe. And he basically takes over the plane. Most of the passengers are dead, but we learn that I think there's 4 or 5. There's a small amount of them still left alive, but they've actually been infected, and they are the beginnings of the strain. We also learn that the Master has been planning this for quite some time. He's been laying his chess pieces for some time. We have Thomas Einhorst, who is his right-hand man vampire, has been prepping and planning this in the US, in New York, for a long time. He's been paying people off to basically get the Master there and get this plan in motion. So they take these passengers off the plane who are alive. They keep them into quarantine, but eventually, due to litigation and laws and stuff, they are released back to their families. And slowly but surely they start then infecting their families, and then it starts spreading from there basically, and people start getting turned into vampires, and quite a unique twist on the vampire genre. Not too unique if you've seen Blade 2, because there is an awful lot of similarities with how these vampires are presented, as the same ones in Blade 2, but there are some differences. So the characters all end up kind of getting together. You know, you've got Ephraim Goodweather, you've got David Bradley's Satrakian, who tried to warn them all right at the beginning. He knows what's going on. He's been involved in this most of his life, and we learn this through lots of flashbacks, which I think are very, very effective. The last show I think that did flashbacks as effectively as this was probably Lost. But there are some very, very effective flashbacks that add some depth to the characters and some backstory to a lot of the characters. Mainly David Bradley, certainly in the first season. So he's known about this for a long time, and he's been battling against these vampires all his life, and he's trying to warn everyone at the beginning. He knows what's here, he knows what's about to happen. Nobody listens, obviously. It starts happening, and then slowly but surely, Goodweather F teams up with him, with Nora, and they start, and Fett and a couple of others, and they start then trying to figure out the best way to take down um, these vampires and the Master. And it takes an awful long time for them all to get on board with this, obviously because it's so unbelievable. But eventually they do hatch a plan to try and kill the Master, but it doesn't quite come off the way they want. They only manage to injure him, really. And we see in the second season he has to then take another body, which is a real shame, I thought, because I thought the imagery of the Master in the first season was really effective. It looked incredible. And lesser so as the seasons have gone on, I think, he's not been as imposing in the following seasons, even though it's retained the same voice. So that's the basic outline of the first season. It has been accused. I've seen some reviews, etc., of the first season saying it was terribly paced or it got slow. Well, I don't agree with that, only because I like character development, and I like when I'm watching shows like this, I like to feel invested in the characters. So I enjoy it when they do put the time required into character building. So that's season one. Season two is an immediate follow on from season one. We get the Master who was injured, who is now searching for a new host. Um, Ephraim's wife, who was infected in the first season and became a vampire. There's a plan hatched where they're turning some blind children into these super vamps. For the main reason is to track down Ephraim's son, because she wants the son. So does the Master. We're introduced to Quinlan's character, who is almost like a daywalker, who's out to kill the Master. It's a bit like Blade, I suppose, in a lot of ways. And he teams up. He teams up with Gus initially, and they try and put this elite team together to try and take down the Master and everybody like that. But it doesn't really come off, and he ends up basically teaming by the end with Satrakian. A big portion of the series is to try and find the Lumen, which is like this mythical book that is supposed to have all these secrets about the vampires in it, ways to fight them, etc. And a good portion of this season is devoted to trying to get hold of this book, both David Bradley's character Satrakian and the vampires, and everybody wants this book. It's a special book. um, Also, Ephraim is trying to develop a bioweapon for a good portion of the show, and he thinks he's found a solution, and he travels to DC to try and present this bioweapon to the powers that be at DC and how to use it against the vampires. But Jonathan Hyde's character, Eldridge Palmer, who's like the human collaborator, obviously for the vampires, puts puts an end to that basically, and he basically just gets out of DC with his life, really. So the bioweapon plan goes out of the window. Also, a big part of this series is Samantha Mathis's character, Councilwoman Feraldo, who starts to fight back really against these creatures and tries to rally New York to fight back against them, to varying degrees of success in the second series. I would say my biggest problem with the second series is the casting of Max Charles as Ephraim's son, Zach. It was a different actor in the first season, and I have to say that I thought the actor they chose to take over this role was seriously poor. Um, I don't like to point out child actors because they're child actors at the end of the day and they're just starting out. But I just thought his performance was shocking. All he does is snarl at people and give them a stare. He's like some snotty little teenager, and that only continues on in season 3. It grates me when he's on screen. I just think it was an incredibly poor casting choice, and I thought it at parts it really, really dragged season 2 down when he was on screen, and season 3 as well, which we'll come on to now. So season 3, so at the end of season 2, Zach gets taken, Nora gets killed, while Ephraim's wife, who's now the vampire, executes the plan to take his son. So at the beginning of season 3, F's pretty much a broken man. And he basically is told by the master that the way to get his son back is to get the lumen. That's the only way he's going to get his son back is to get the book, the lumen. So he makes contact with Satrakian and Fett, basically telling them that Nora's dead and all this kind of stuff. And he lures him into a false sense of security. And Quinlan figures him out pretty quickly. Like the Daywalker, and says, I will help you because it'll give me an opportunity to kill the master. So they hatch a plan to make a deal with the master to exchange his son for the lumen. It all goes awry, but within the plan they think they've killed the master because they end up chopping off the head of the host that he's in. But actually they don't really kill him because you see this red worm creep off down a drain, and that's actually the essence of the master. So the plan doesn't really work. He doesn't get his son back, and all that happens really is that F has lost the trust of the people he's worked with over the last 2 seasons, and he's got to really work to get that back. So he's a bit of an outcast. He ends up going to a hideout, and Dutch turns up, like the English hacker who's been part of this all the seasons. And together they start working on a plan to kind of interrupt the signals, the micro signals that the master gives to all the vampires, and they work on this device that's going to interrupt the signal and block it. So that's a big chunk of their season there, and all the while he's still hoping and praying that he's going to get his son back. In this season, Samantha Mathis's character, the councilwoman, she continues to try and win back New York, but eventually it really goes south for the police in New York in this season, to the point why by the end of the season there's nobody left really in regards to authority figures. We get a bit of a twist in the character of Eldridge Palmer in this season, who realises that the master is never really going to come good on his deal. So he starts siding with Satrakian, basically because he's dying. He wants the formula for the white, which will keep him healthy and alive. And he ends up making a deal with them. He's going to give them information as long as he gets doses of the white from Satrakian. We see Zach F's son quite a lot in this season, but he's now under the control of his mother, who has obviously been turned, but can present herself as human. But again, it's just annoying every time he's on screen because he's just so... The character is naive and the actor's not very good, so it's not a good combination really. It's an incredibly frustrating character that, for me, is the worst part of the show. Constantly making terrible decisions. Decisions that make you really want to kick the cat, and the biggest one is at the end of the series, which when I actually saw what he did, Ephraim's son, at the end of the season, I was fuming. I couldn't believe how cross it made me. But it just did. I just think it's a real misstep the way they're taking this character, and I don't know if that's how it's written in the books or the comics. It just winds me up, this character. It really, really does. So ultimately, the end game for this season is they come up with a plan. They realise that they really are going to struggle to kill the Master, so they decide that they're going to trap him in this box that's lined with silver and lead, so that he can't communicate and he can't ever get out, and they're going to dump him in the ocean. So they hatch this plan to try and capture the Master, who has now taken Eldridge Palmer as his host. And to some degree, it's a success. However, as I've just mentioned previously, Zack witnesses F killing his mother and throws a strop and clicks a nuclear weapon. I know. Because he has a baby strop, because he saw his father kill his mother, who's a vampire, quite clearly. It's not his mother anymore. He has a strop and clicks a device that sets off a nuclear weapon, which, yeah, it's bizarre, but that's what happened. And so just as they're about to put the Master on a boat and dump him in the river, the bomb goes off. He escapes. At the end of the series, you see them all looking at the bomb exploding. New York is in absolute chaos now. The boy's gone with the vampires. The Master's escaped. And I'm looking forward to seeing season 4 to see where this takes us. So, other than a couple of hiccups along the way, I've really enjoyed this show. I do think it has made some missteps. I do believe that the 4th season is the last season, which I think is a good decision, because I don't know how they're going to stretch this out much more unless they started focusing on the attacks on the rest of the world, which is a bit of a niggle for me, because all we ever see is the focus on New York. The Masters in New York, bombs are going off in New York, everything's happening in New York. Why is New York the centre of the world when it's clear that there are attacks and infections happening all over the world? So unless they're going to expand it to the rest of the world, there's nowhere else for the series to go after season 4, I don't think. But I am enjoying the show so far. I do think it's an effective horror show. Great imagery, great vampire show. And finally, vampires have got some respect back after the ridiculous way they've been portrayed over the last few years in the cinema. Twilight. So I'm really, really looking forward to season 4. I'm kind of hoping that the boy gets his comeuppance. I know that sounds terrible, but you know, he's almost like some of the characters on Game of Thrones that you love to hate. He's really, really gets on my nerves, that character, and I don't know if it's intentional, but he really, really does. But it's got some strong characters. It's got good character development in this show. I like the flashbacks. It adds some more depth to the characters. The action scenes are impressive when you get them. The effects are really good. Like I say, the imagery, the horror imagery is excellent. And now it's getting to the point where it's getting an apocalyptic feel about it, this show. So I'm interested to see where it goes in season 4. So I know this isn't the most in-depth review you'll ever see, but I'm recapping 2 seasons that I haven't rewatched. It's just from memory. So I hope that I've given you a bit of a flavour for the series, given you a decent recap of the 3 seasons so far, and I will probably maybe do a review of episode 1 of season 4 and then do a season review for that series as well, because like I say, I think it's the final one. So I hope you found this video interesting and useful. If you do, click like. Please consider subscribing to the channel if you would consider that. That would be wonderful. And thank you very much for watching.